What's up, everybody? So in this video we're going to be talking about vessels. So this picture right here is what you would see if a scientist removed everything in your body except your vessels. It still looks like you. It still looks like a human. That's because your vessels are absolutely everywhere. You have big vessels, you have teeny tiny vessels that you cannot even see. So vessels cannot be underestimated. They are so important. They're everywhere and they have a huge role. So let's just talk about it. Now, the big picture is this, right? You know this. As a human, right? Any living thing, you have a lot of systems in your body. What do I mean? So you have, for example, your digestive system. This system is going to control everything with regards to nutrients and food. It's going to help you break down food. It's going to help you poo, like remove the waste from your body, everything to do with nutrients and food, right? Now, another system could be your respiratory system that is in charge of all the breathing and inhaling, exhaling, gas exchange, right? All of this. So, another system that we're going to learn about is circulatory system. And this is the system responsible for moving blood all around your body, making sure all the cells can get the stuff that is inside the blood, right? Because inside your blood, there's a lot of nutrients, there's a lot of important cells that our body needs. And then they need to be moved everywhere to all your cells so that your cells can stay healthy. Now, the circulatory system has three parts. The heart, remember, the heart is this machine that's going to pump this blood. It's the thing that's going to make the blood move because blood just stays by itself if there's no heart. And the second part of the circulatory system, other than the heart, is the blood. Is the vessels, right? The vessels. We can see here. This is the heart. The heart will pump into these vessels, and these vessels will carry the blood away into the specific areas that it's required. For example, let's say this heart can pump blood into this vessel here. This vessel will branch into this one, and that one will keep going, and supply every part of your body, even the smallest cell of your small finger, right? Everything is supplied. So that's another important part, the vessels. Now, lastly, it's the stuff inside the vessels. Inside your vessels, you have blood, right? Your vessels are not empty. Inside these vessels is blood. Blood has a lot of things, oxygen, nutrients, cells, right? Everything that's important to our survival, right? So in this video, we're just going to focus on vessels, making clear what vessels is. This part of the circulatory system. I already made a video on heart, and we'll recap a little bit in this video. And then I will still make a video on blood, right? Blood itself. So let's get started. If we look at this guy, let's say this is a guy, right? And let's say this is his, so we open him up. This is what's going on inside this guy. Now we can see that he can breathe stuff in. And then this goes in through these pipes, this trachea, into his bronchi, into his lungs, right? That's one system. And then inside here we have the heart, which is part of the what? The circulatory system. Now the heart, like I said, is going to pump stuff through these vessels, and it's going to go all throughout our body. And some of these vessels will bring things back towards the heart, right? So it's important. Two concepts. Some vessels are going to carry blood away from the heart because the heart will pump it away, and some vessels will bring blood back to the heart, so the heart can pump it again, right? Otherwise, the blood will stay stagnated or still somewhere. So it needs to both be taken away when it's pumped away by the heart, and some vessels need to bring blood back towards the heart. So there's two kind of big ideas here, away from the heart and towards the heart. So let's take a look at the heart. So we're going to zoom in now to the heart here. Bear in mind, right, this picture, just to make sure you know, maybe you know already, this heart right here, we can see these vessels coming off of it, and I cut them short. In reality, they keep going to wherever they need to go. So this one right here would keep going to where it needs to go. This one that I cut right here would keep going where it needs to go. Same with this one, this one, this one. So I cut them short just so it doesn't look so crazy. So just bear that in mind. Maybe you knew that already. It doesn't matter. So let's now kind of focus a little bit more on this idea of the vessels, what it means, what arteries are, what veins are. We're going to get more into that. So to understand this, we're going to open up the heart. So the heart here is now closed. We're going to slice it open so we can see what's going on the inside of the heart. So here we go. We slice it open. And as a quick review, it would make a bit more sense, honestly, if you know a little bit about the heart. So if you don't worry too much. I'll try my best to make it clear as possible. But if you can, maybe watch my video on the heart. It would make a bit more sense because I'm not going to go that slowly and detailed now. So anyways, so we sliced open the heart. Notice how there's four big kind of spaces. One space here, one space here, one space here, one space here. And it's kind of symmetrical. This side of the heart is symmetrical to this side, right? So they're kind of, if you draw a line here in the middle, it's kind of symmetrical. Two chambers on this side, two chambers on this side. Now, let's say, right, we have many, many cells, and all, like in our leg, in our head, wherever, and they all make waste. So our cells will use energy and make waste in the process, right? It's the case, same as you. You eat food, but you have to crap at the end of the day. It's the same with cells. So cells will use energy and make waste in the process. Now the waste is bad. We don't want to keep it, we don't want the, for example, let's say your blood can be full of oxygen, but your cells will use the oxygen to make ATP, but it will release carbon dioxide, right? Carbon dioxide is bad. It's a waste. We don't want to keep it in our blood. So let's say there's this vessel here. So this is our heart, this whole thing. One of the vessels of the heart is called this one, the vena cava. The vena cava, okay? Vena just means vein, okay? Vein, so it's kind of a vein. Now, this vein brings blood towards the heart. Remember how I said some vessels take blood away from the heart and some bring it towards the heart. This one will bring blood towards the heart, and it will bring blood towards the heart that is low in oxygen, right? It will bring it from the cells that used all the oxygen and made carbon dioxide. So now this is kind of like, we can call it waste blood. It's like, it's not fresh. It has waste. It has carbon dioxide and low oxygen. So it brings it back towards the heart. Same with this one here. And if you don't understand the idea of the color, the red and blue, we're going to get to that now. So now we can say that this one here, we call this the inferior vena cava. Don't worry about the names too much. I'm just trying to make things a little bit clearer. This inferior vena cava will bring blood from your lower body, your lower extremities, whereas the superior vena cava will bring waste blood from the top of your body, right? So it brings it down. Let me put in some arrows. So if I put this, so it's going to bring blood from below. And then we can have this one will bring blood from above. Okay, and it brings the waste back blood into this top compartment of the right side of the heart, right? So this is the right atrium. So it brings it in here. So important. Any kind of vessel that brings blood towards the heart, we call a vein. A vein. And a good way for you to remember that is like this. I'm going to put this here. Veins bring blood towards the heart. See, the V and the V. I misspelled it on purpose for the mnemonic to work, but this is big brain tip uno, okay? Number one. So veins bring blood towards the heart. So vena cava is a kind of vein, and it brings blood towards the heart. So we can call it a vein. Now, after the blood comes into the right atrium, it's going to be pumped into the right ventricle, right? Then what's going to happen? Let me show you this. So now, notice the blood coming from the vein into the right atrium will now travel from the right atrium into the right ventricle. The right ventricle will pump the blood out of this vessel here, okay? This vessel will carry it out here, and you can see this one kind of goes under here and out here, right? So let's make that clear. So what do we call this vessel that's pumping out now? So we can call this one the pulmonary artery. Okay, what does this mean? So this vessel is going towards the pulmonary area. This is the lungs, right? The lungs. So remember, this blood was low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. But now so it's brought back towards the heart. The heart's gonna pump it now to the lungs. Why? Because the lungs, remember you have two lungs, one on this side and one on this side, right? We can see it in this image here. You can see this is one lung, this is one lung. So basically, the heart will pump from the right ventricle to the one lung and also the other lung through this vessel called the pulmonary artery. Okay, why artery? Why not pulmonary vein? Because I told you, arteries carry blood away from the heart. So this vessel is an artery because it carries blood away from the heart and it's called pulmonary artery because it carries it towards the pulmonary circulation or the lung area, okay? And one for the left side and the right side. Okay, great. Now, after the blood goes to the lung, it's going to leave the lung because the lung is going to remove all this carbon dioxide and put in fresh oxygen. Now, this fresh oxygenated blood is going to need to go back towards the heart. It's going to go back towards the heart in these vessels because now it's fresh, it's ready. It wants to go back towards the heart because now the heart can pump it to all the areas that need it. So we call, so both the left side and the right side, right? So you can see these vessels. So what do you think we call these vessels? An artery or a vein? Because it's going towards the heart. So what are we going to call it? A vein. So instead of calling it an artery, you're going to call it now a pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein is going towards the heart, But now, what's the difference between the blood that was in the pulmonary artery and the blood that was in the pulmonary vein? The pulmonary vein has now oxygen. It's fresh in oxygen, lower in carbon dioxide, and it's coming back towards the left atrium. And then guess what? Then it's going to get pumped now from the left atrium into the left ventricle, and then where? Then it's going to be pumped out through this little thing here into this space and then out towards the rest of the body, right? So my question is, let's make this clear. Okay, so it's going to get pumped up and down to wherever it needs to in the lower extremities. Now, what do you think? What do you think we call this one? An artery or a vein? An artery, because it's going away from the heart, right? So we call this the aorta. The aorta is an artery that's carrying fresh oxygenated blood away from the heart towards wherever it needs to go, your small toe, your ear, whatever, any place that needs this oxygen, this fresh oxygenated blood. Okay, now before we move on, so now you get the big concept. We have many vessels. They can be arteries or veins. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, vein carries it towards the heart. Now, one last thing, these colors, they confuse you, right? Why are some red, why are some blue? Can you spot the pattern? Maybe you can. At this point, we make it blue. Why? Because the blood has low oxygen. Any vessel that has low oxygen is going to be blue. We know the vena cava is carrying waste blood from the cells of our body with low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. So we're going to make it blue. Then it gets put into this right atrium, right ventricle, pumped out of this pulmonary artery, which nothing changed yet. It's still low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. And then it goes to the lung. The lung is going to change it. The lung is going to put what? It's going to put oxygen in and remove carbon dioxide from this blood. This blood will now have high oxygen and low carbon dioxide. So we make it red. So basically, and then the red from the left atrium, this blood gets pumped into the left ventricle and then pumped out of the aorta. Remember, at this point, the blood hasn't been used by cells yet, so it is still high in oxygen, okay? So basically, we can say that any red vessel, when your book makes a red vessel, it implies that it's oxygen rich. It is oxygen rich, full of oxygen. When it's blue, it's oxygen poor. So do not confuse colors with artery or vein. An artery can be red or blue, okay? It can be red or blue. But you can always remember, an artery always goes away from the heart and the vein always goes towards the heart. So this is a big concept. You shouldn't get confused. Now we get how these vessels link with the heart, right? It's not a separate thing. Vessels aren't separate from the heart. They originate from the heart, okay? Now, what I want you to understand is that these vessels, when they come off the heart and they go to their places, they're not going to stay as one vessel. They're going to split until they get super tiny. Let me show you. So here we have the heart. Say we take the aorta, this vessel here, and we see it's going to go and it's going to split into a small branch, and maybe another branch will come off here. You know, it's very complicated. And then that branch will split and have a smaller branch, and then that branch will split and have many smaller branches, and then that branch will split and have even smaller branches. So you got to understand the concept. Arteries, there's two words you need to know. Artery is the big form, is a bigger thing. And arterioles is a smaller form of an artery. So the aorta would be like an artery. This would be an artery. But the very small ones, the very teeny tiny ones that came off by splitting and splitting and splitting, these are called arterioles. So in the simple way of saying it is arterioles is a smaller version of an artery. Same with veins. Veins, we'll get to what veins are and arteries are in more detail later. So these arterioles eventually become super small vessels called capillaries. And again, we'll also talk about these. And the capillaries are very cool, and you'll see why. And the capillaries will drain into veins, and then the small veins called venules. So in reality, I should put it like this. Small venules will become big veins, because the small venules will then drain into the veins, which will go into the bigger veins, which will go back to the heart, right? So now let's look on to how the veins look like and what the capillaries are, what arteries are, how they look like, because thus far what we know is that arteries go away from the heart and veins come towards the heart, and how to remember between these color differences, right? And the fact that they split. So it's not just, but this is also very easy to see in this picture, right? You can see there's a big aorta here, and then there's a branch, and then branch, until they're super tiny, right? So there's many branches. Now the branching is very important, because imagine a teeny tiny cell and only this one big vessel. How can this one big vessel supply a teeny tiny cell? You need a teeny tiny vessel to supply a teeny tiny cell. Okay, so now we're going to look now at a great image that explains this very well. Here we go. We're first going to look at the structures. So here we have arteriole. Okay, we're looking at a small artery, not a big artery, because an arteriole is next to a capillary, right? So we're looking now at a small artery called an arteriole, and then in there we have capillaries, and then here we have a venule. Remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart. So this vessel is carrying blood away from the heart to all the cells that need it. Something special is going to happen at the capillaries, and then the veins are going to drain all the waste blood back to the heart. Okay? That's the big idea here. So let's label some stuff. Okay, here we go. So notice how there's some small differences between, because we cut open now the arteriole so you can see what the layers are, what's going on, how thick it is, and all that sort of things. And here we have a vein that we did the same thing with, and here we have a capillary that we did the same thing with as well. So you can see what's common here. Let's look at the most inner layer of this arteriole. It's got a thin purplish layer, right? Here's a cell, here's a cell, here's a cell. It's like a one layer made up of cells. We call this the endothelium. Endo means inside, okay? Endo means inside. It's one layer thick. But notice this. I want to make this clear. Yeah, here. Notice if we look at the vein, we're going to compare the artery and the vein. If we look at the vein, it also has this thin layer here called what? The endothelium, right? Same thing. And we'll talk about the functions later. We're just labeling stuff now. Overall, you can see, maybe it's not super clear in this image, but an artery the wall is much thicker than a vein. And a capillary has the thinnest layer. It only has one layer. What do we call this layer again? The same thing as endothelium. It's one layer. So the capillary is small and one layer thick. Now, what else can we see in this artery? You can see under this endothelium, there's a small white layer. We don't need to worry about it much. That's not important for us. But under that white layer, we have this thick layer called a muscle layer. Okay, it's very thick, especially in an artery. Under that, we have this thin bluish layer, okay, which we call adventitia. So overall, 3 important layers you need to know. In some books, they call this inner layer the intima, and then they call this the media, and then they call this the adventitia. But you can bear that in mind. So some books may name it different, but the book I used calls this the endothelium, which I think is better, more accurate. And then this is muscle, and that's adventitia. Now, same goes for here, only the proportions are different. So we have the endothelium, but notice the muscle layer of the vein is far thinner. It's not so thick, right? Oh, I mislabeled. This is the endothelium. And then this is going to be muscle, but the difference is the muscle is thin. And again, now we have this outer layer here called the adventitia, but compared to the artery, it's much thicker. Now, one more thing, notice this arrow. It's pointing to the inside of the arteriole, and it's pointing to the inside of the vein. What do we call the inside space? We call it the lumen. Now, an artery has a relatively narrow, it's hard to see in this picture, but an artery has a very relatively narrow lumen, whereas a vein has a relatively large, big lumen, okay? Again, not so easy to see in this picture. Now, one special thing that a venule has, a vein, compared to an artery, is a valve, okay? A valve. Notice this little valve thing here. And I'll show you another picture just now that'll make it more clear. A little valve, okay? Now, bear in mind, this structure that I'm showing you, although I'm labeling arteriole and I'm labeling venule, it applies to arteries and it applies to veins. The only difference between arteriole and an artery is the size, right? That's the main difference that you need to know about. Okay. Now, bear this in mind now. So I told you, the heart is pumping this fresh blood through the artery, and it goes towards the capillary. Now, at the capillary, something special happens. We know that around the capillary area, there's a lot of cells. For example, let's say this area has your ear cells. Okay, we're trying to supply your finger cells or whatever. Now, these cells need to receive nutrients from inside the vessel. Inside the vessel, there's blood, right? The blood has nutrients and everything in there that needs to reach these little cells. So what's special about the capillaries is that they are slightly permeable. What does that mean? That means things can leave the capillary to the outside. And when things can leave the capillary to the outside, they can go to these cells and supply them and keep them alive. At the same time, these cells will make waste products, and the capillaries are permeable. So things can go back into the capillaries and into these venules. And these venules will take this waste back towards the heart. Okay, so that's important to understand. So you can imagine if we have this single layer, that things can easily leave and go towards the cells that need it. Now, I want you to show you something. So a capillary is very tiny. I want to show you here dimensions. It's about 10 micrometers, μm, micrometers. That's about the size of a single red blood cell. So a single red blood cell can barely fit through there. Sometimes it has to fold to be able to fit through there. So you can imagine that blood flows very slowly in a capillary, and you'll see why this is important. So it flows around 1 millimeter per second, very, very slow, very, very slow. Now, one last thing is, I showed you all of these kind of like layers and the difference between the veins and the artery structure-wise. Now, in these little sometimes you can't see it in this image, but there are very, very thin layers inside the arteries that have elastic material in it. Okay, and same with the veins. So just bear in mind, there is sometimes elastic layers in it. Let's go to functions. So if we look now at the functions, we're going to now understand a little bit why the artery is made the way it is and why the vein is made the way it is. Okay, so if we look at an artery, we know its wall is thicker. It's thicker. Why is it thicker? It is thicker because it needs to withstand more pressure. Remember, the heart is pumping blood very hard, powerful, into the arteries. If the arteries don't have a nice, thick, strong wall, it will just burst. So what makes the arteries thick? This nice, thick, muscular layer, right? Remember. So let's now quickly look at the individual layers and say what their function is in an artery. So the first one is endothelium, this inner layer. What's special about this layer? It is made of a type of cell that is nice and slippery. So the blood can flow nice and smoothly. There's very little friction. That's the main purpose of the endothelium. Now, the muscle, remember I told you, it's very nice and thick. And that's important in an artery because when the heart pumps the blood into the artery, it needs to be strong. It shouldn't rupture. And additionally, we know muscle can contract. So this artery is going to contract and squeeze this blood further along towards the capillaries so that it doesn't stand still, so it keeps moving. Okay, it's like when you hold a straw or something that's full of water and you squeeze it, something's going to shoot out. It's the same here. When this vessel contracts, it shoots the blood forward, makes it keep moving. Okay, so it kind of maintains movement. The contraction helps to maintain the movement of the blood. Adventitia, so this outer layer, remember it's made up of a little protein called collagen. Now, this is mainly for strength. It mainly helps keep this vessel strong and sturdy. Now, lumen, the lumen I said is relatively small, and that is because we want to keep pressure. How does this make sense? What I mean by that? It keeps blood flow. Have you ever used a hose pipe, right? So let's take a hose pipe. and you just turn the tap on, and the blood and the water flows, and then you go to the end of it and you like squeeze the end, and suddenly it shoots out, right? It shoots way faster. It's the same thing here. If the lumen is a bit smaller, then blood flows faster and more efficiently. So, but if the lumen's really big, if you don't squeeze the hose pipe and the lumen, the inside is very big, then the water flows more slowly. So the reason why the lumen is more small in an artery is to maintain blood flow. It's to keep pressure so the blood can keep flowing. And then lastly here, we have some elastic layers that I mentioned, right? And this is mainly to help the blood vessel be able to be stretchable. So when the heart pumps all this pressure into this vessel, it can expand a little bit so it doesn't pop. It's a bit stretchy, right? Okay, now what about capillaries? So we know the blood then eventually reaches the capillaries where exchange is going to happen. The main purpose of capillaries is to exchange nutrients. So this kind of vessel is unique compared to an artery because it's very, very thin. It's only one layer. So that's useful because imagine if nutrients had to transverse or pass through all of these layers, the endothelium, the muscle, the elastic layers, the adventitia. It would take ages for the cells to get energy or get nutrients. But capillaries are very, very uniquely made so that when the nutrients, when blood comes to these capillaries, they only have to travel a small distance to get out. Okay, a very small distance from the red blood cell through this one layer, and then they've reached these cells, which they can supply. So again, endothelium, one layer. It's again, same thing for reduced friction, same as the arterioles. And then lumen, very small lumen. Why? Because very small lumen means the blood cells have to squish through, so they move more slowly. Because they move more slowly, it means there's more time for the nutrients to leave the red blood cells or the nutrients to leave the blood towards the cells. Because imagine if the blood just went so quickly from the artery to the vein, then there's no time for the nutrients to leave the blood out of the capillaries. So it's very important that the lumen is very narrow so things can move a bit more slowly and things have time to leave. Now again, this is quite obvious though, capillaries are very branched. Notice we have an artery here and it branches just like in this image. This is important because this means all the cells in this area can be very quickly supplied. Imagine we only had one capillary coming through here. It would be harder to supply all the kinds of cells going on here. So the branching of the capillaries make it very easy. It makes a large surface area for all the cells to be supplied. Okay. Last one here, venules. It's going to be very similar to these other ones. Now, venules are thinner. It's, again, tough to see in this image, but normally the wall is very thin. It's like a straw. When you take a straw, you can squish it and literally fold the straw. It can just, like an artery doesn't really do that. An artery, when you squeeze it, it doesn't bend like a straw does, but a vein kind of behaves like a straw. When you press on the straw, it just folds. Okay, that's because a vein is thinner. It's not as strong. And it doesn't need to be. Because of its function, it doesn't need to be strong. Because the vein is so far away from the artery, from the heart, I mean, when the heart pumps, right, it sends it into the artery. This blood has to travel all the way down to the teeny tiny capillaries and then to the veins. So by the time the blood reaches the veins, there's no pressure. It's moving so slowly, there's not much volume, so it's not, this vein doesn't need to be so strong. It doesn't need to handle the pressure from the heart. It's so far away. So therefore it can be thinner. So the endothelium, again, same reason. For reduced friction, blood can flow very smoothly. Muscle, it's there, but it's very weak. It's very thin, very weak, because again, it doesn't need to be so strong. It doesn't need to contract to move the blood along. To move the blood along. Adventitia, this layer, it's relatively thick, and again, it's to help make the vein relatively sturdy, so it doesn't rip apart, right? The lumen is relatively large. Again, a little bit hard to see in this image, but the lumen is very large because the vein needs to bring all this blood. It needs to collect and pool a lot of blood and bring it back towards the heart, right? A lot of blood left the heart, so a lot of blood's gonna come back. So it's very big, so it can hold a lot of this blood. And it also makes sense because the wall is thinner, so the inside is gonna be much bigger. Now, again, it also has an elastic layer, just like the artery, that helps to make it stretchy a bit more elastic. But one thing that's very unique from venules is valves that you can see here. I'm going to show you a picture that's slightly more clear now. Why do we need valves? What are valves? Let me show you. So here we have a valve, we have a vein, and we can see blood flows from wherever it goes towards the heart, right? And when blood flows, the vein is very what do we call it? The blood flow in the vein is very slow, very slow, right? Like I said, because it's so far from the heart that the blood flow is very slow. And you can imagine if you need to if there's a vein that needs to bring blood from your toe up towards your heart, that's going against gravity. So logically, you would think that blood would just keep falling back down towards your feet, right? That's true. So that's why there's something called a valve. So when the blood is being brought back up, every time it goes back up, it cannot go back down. So when blood tries to go back down, the valve gets shut. So basically, it's a one-way door for blood to go back towards your heart. So, okay, that makes sense then. So now this valve is basically making sure that blood goes only up and not down, right? Okay, that's cool. Now, you said that the muscle is quite weak. So what causes the blood to go up? Like what causes the contraction, or what pushes the blood to go upwards in the first place? What causes this upwards movement? Remember how I said the vein is quite thin, right? Now look at your leg. So let's say there's a vein in your leg somewhere. There's many veins, but let's focus on one. And you have muscle in your leg as well. So when you walk, you constantly contract your legs, right? So your legs are going to squeeze on these veins. And luckily, these veins are quite weak. They're quite weak, right? So when you contract on them, you squeeze them. When you squeeze them, you shove the blood upwards. So it's like having a straw or a pipe that's full of water and you just squeeze somewhere. You're going to shoot the blood up, right? It's the same thing. So your legs are going to contract and squeeze on this weaker vein, causing the blood to flow upwards. So that's why it's bad to sit very still for a long time in an airplane, because your blood doesn't get the opportunity to get moved back up. So your ankles get very swollen because all the blood is stagnating in the bottom. So your feet get very swollen. That's why it's good to walk every now and then on an airplane, because it's going to help, or after a long sit, because then it's going to help move this blood back up and remove your swelling. Okay, so that's great. That's it, right? That's all you need to know about these three. Overall, the whole purpose of an artery is to carry blood away from the heart, and for that reason, it needs to be strong, thick, okay? It would be able to withstand a lot of pressure. The capillary, on the other hand, is going to be made to release all these nutrients. It can be nice and thin, single layer, everything can remove quickly into the surrounding cells, and everything can go into it to then go into the veins. The veins is nice and thin. It's going to have a lot of space to carry blood. It is going to have valves that's going to prevent backflow. So this is the gist. This is what you need to know. I'm going to show you here a nice little summary. This is not all you need to know, right? I'm just giving you a nice summary to give you overall key things that you need to know. Artery, so if we have here artery, vein, capillary, the wall, artery is thick, vein is thin, capillary is very thin, one cell thin. Valves, artery has none, veins does, capillaries does not. Blood pressure is high in an artery, yes, because it's the blood is coming directly from the heart, a high source of pressure. By the time the blood reaches the veins, the pressure is very low, same in the capillaries, right? Now the purpose, we already talked about these. Now here is one exam question, and if you can do this one, you've nailed everything. So this one is basically saying, explain the relationship between structure and function of arteries, capillaries, and veins. So here, if you say 3 of these things about arteries, 3 of these things about capillaries, 3 of these things about veins, you can get all the points. Well, actually, you'll get more because you only need 8. So you can look at this slowly, and I think I covered everything, so I hope this makes as much sense as possible. Next, we will talk about the actual blood inside these vessels.